Hello, everyone. Halloween is a very strange holiday. Personally, I don't understand it. I don't know, kids worshiping ghosts, pretending to be devils. Things on TV that are completely inappropriate for younger viewers. Things like the following half hour. Nothing seems to bother my kids, but tonight's show, which I totally wash my hands of, is really scary. So if you have sensitive children, maybe you should tuck them into bed early tonight instead of writing us angry letters tomorrow. Thanks for your attention.
The scariest time of year is once again upon us. All things spooky are in. Ghouls, goblins, brain aneurysms.
It can happen anywhere at any time. That's why it's so terrifying.
As someone who loves horror and creepy creatures, this really is the highlight of each year I have to live through. I love costumes and makeup, and while I don't limit myself to Halloween on those things, I like seeing what everyone else has going on. And on Halloween, you try to go out extra hard. The Halloween-themed media is what makes it for me. That and the Christmas items already in store. It is in October without... Christmas. I watch horror movies all year round, but they hit different at this time. Nothing's quite like watching Halloween on Halloween, except maybe watching Halloween 3 on Halloween.
It's 4 days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. It's 4 days to Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
But scary Halloween movies, or silly Halloween movies, it's all my jam. And if there's one Halloween-themed piece of media that reigns supreme over all others, it's... the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror Halloween specials. I don't think I have to introduce anyone to the Treehouse of Horrors. Or is it Treehouses of Horror? You all know what it is. Each season, The Simpsons airs a special Halloween anthology episode with 3 short, scary stories. This tradition started with season 2, with the first Treehouse of Horror, so the numbering is always annoyingly, or scarily, one behind the current season. The episodes, especially in the first few seasons, had a narrative device surrounding these segments. The kids telling scary stories to each other, having 3 horrible nightmares, or Bart introducing them in this night gallery type thing. All of this stuff is great, but with this video, I want to strictly look into the individual segments, pick out my favorites, and talk about them for a bit. I am openly going to be biased with this, as the stories range from horror to sci-fi to... whatever, but I personally prefer the horror-oriented ones. There are some classic sci-fi themed ones, but I like to be scared, especially in this special time. And because everyone, me included, believes in classic Simpsons supremacy and mostly cares about the episodes of that era, I want to start with recommendations from the middle to late seasons. I put timestamps in the video, but please don't skip this. We have a gentleman's agreement that you won't. It is true that as time went on, the quality of the show started declining. People usually consider season 8 or 9 to be the last classic season, although I like a lot of it into season 12 or so. But I think the Treehouse of Horror specials have always stayed, well, special. There have been dots, and the segments probably did reach their peak around season 5 or 6. Spoilers, I guess. But I do enjoy these in the newer seasons more than I tend to enjoy the regular episodes. In fact, in some high praise, the 21st season's Treehouse may have outdone the classic era in making a zombie parody. In Don't Have a Cow, Mankind, over Dial Z for Zombies, that episode is a classic and has a lot of fun moments.
You killed the zombie Flanders.
You was a zombie?
But in terms of the zombie part, I think Don't Have a Cow, Mankind does a better job. Not only is there more of it, Dial Z spends a lot of time to get to the zombies. The mayhem and the satirizing of the genre works better in my opinion. They get every joke they can out of the premise in the short time they have. They have a classic post-apocalyptic vehicle, they satirize the Finding the Cure plotline, the ending is especially hilarious and fitting for The Simpsons, and there's even a brief found footage section in the beginning. Maybe it feels more timely because of where the zombie genre was at the point, having a resurgence early to mid-2000s with films like 28 Days Later, the Dawn of the Dead remake, and Romero himself returning with Land of the Dead, as well as admittedly better comedy zombies with Shaun of the Dead. Don't Have a Cow, Mankind is definitely more 28 Days than classic Romero, which Dial Z is more reminiscent of. So I guess you can go with which kind of zombies you prefer. Not especially scary, but the jokes land, and the zombies are a threatening foe.
Now remember, no loud noises. Oh man, that breeze feels good!
A different segment from the same episode, and perhaps my favorite from the more modern seasons, dial M for murder or press hashtag to return to main menu. Hey, that's 2 dial jokes in a row, and when I say in a row, I mean 17 years apart. I guess this is more for me for putting these back to back in the script. Although there's another one called dial D for deadly in season 23, I guess someone really liked dial M for murder in the writing room. The title of this one is ridiculous anyways, not sure if it's in a good way, but the episode more than makes up for it. It's a Hitchcock parody, where Lisa wants revenge on Miss Hoover and Bart on Mrs. Krabappel. They hatch a crisscross plan, one ding-dong ditches the other's target, vice versa, and they have an alibi.
Crisscross! I'm in.
Lisa takes ding-dong ditching to mean, well, ding-dong ditch, while Bart assumes she understood that the mission was to kill and ditch the corpse of the teacher. If there isn't an egg on Lisa's face. Bart murders Miss Hoover and intends to hold Lisa to her end of the contract. Hijinks ensue. This episode is funny and unsettling. There's a fair amount of atmosphere and I like the black and white aesthetic. It fits well. I really like this one for the concept as well as the execution. Just like any Treehouse of Horror episode, it works wonderfully even without having seen any source material it's parodying. The jokes themselves are very funny and the series of events genuinely compelling. The stylistic parody works great, but even that doesn't require you to really know that much Hitchcock. The shots and choice of music work wonderfully on their own. It's a very pleasing episode to look at. The version of Bart in this episode is at its peak evil. They take the good-heartedness out of his usual good-hearted prankster shtick and replace the pranks with murder. I still like that they play up his usual characteristics. The murder is out of character for him, but he acts how Bart still acts in the show, and Lisa is very Lisa throughout the whole thing. I really like their dynamic through this, and the ending comes together in a satisfying way. The carousel set piece, I guess you can call it that, is exciting and is at the same time funny and morbid. And we even get a Hitchcock cameo. That's cool. All in all, a great segment.
Ding dong ditch means you kill her. Then you throw that ding dong into a ditch. Jeez, pick up a book.
If it's Halloween spirit you seek, however, I think you can't go wrong with It's the Grand Pumpkin Millhouse, a pretty direct parody of It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, an animated special that itself is a wonderful watch on All Hallows Eve. The Grand Pumpkin segment isn't the funniest segment, even if it is very funny, nor is it scary really at all, but what it may lack in those departments, it makes up for in the Halloween feel. Being a direct stylistic parody of the Charlie Brown short, it's charming as hell, and the style works. I really love the look of this episode. And despite me earlier saying it's not the funniest, that only applies because Simpsons, at its funniest, is as funny as it gets. The episode is funny, and all the characters work great. Having a Millhouse-centered Treehouse segment is something the Simpsons could do more often. The Grand Pumpkin is also a fun addition, but the direct Halloween connection really makes it a must-see episode.
What'd you say, Mom?
Nothing. I'm practicing my trombone.
There are a lot of other good segments in the later seasons. Homer is a weird and borderline gross one. Intrusion of the Potty Switchers is another with a lot of icky and creative imagery. And Toy Gory does a neat horror-themed Toy Story parody, with very charming stylized 3D animation. More funny ones would be something like Reaper Madness, where Homer gets the powers of the Grim Reaper. Also the one where Bart goes to school in hell, School is Hell, is a lot of fun. What better place to start than the very beginning? Note that this is the only Treehouse of Horror episode that I will talk about wholly like this. It's not the best episode, but those segments will be talked more about later on anyways. These first episode segments are classics, but I found no other good place to put them into. They are essential in my books, and I feel if you are to go and watch one and you haven't somehow, this is a great starting point. The wraparound in this episode is Bart and Lisa telling each other scary stories in the treehouse on the night of Halloween, while Homer eavesdrops on them. Maggie's there too, but she doesn't say as much. This is a nice wraparound, and even though I will not talk about these more, it's always nice when they bother to have one, and this does just as much in putting you in the Halloween spirit as any of the segments themselves. This one is especially charming. But on to the segments. Our first segment is Bad Dream House, a title that never fails to make me laugh, especially with Bart's delivery.
I call it Bad Dream House.
It's basically a parody of the Amityville Horror and Poltergeist, but more so overall haunted house genre. It also works fantastically as its own horror comedy story. It's a very simple episode. The Simpsons move into a haunted house, the Addams Family house by the looks of it. That premise in on itself is really all you need. Sometimes just putting this family into a certain situation kinda writes itself. The season 2 feel is strong in this one. It is in all three of these. They have that distinct early Simpsons charm, but this benefits a lot from it. It's really the best era to make this. While the following segments could have been made a few seasons later and worked just as wonderfully, this story really benefits from being in the era that it is in. The later seasons had gone to places with their horror segments that would have made this feel a tad behind the times in comparison. Or maybe that's just me. This episode is a really good early example of The Simpsons riding the line between scary and funny in a superb way.
Superb.
A lot of the bad omens of things to come in the house are creepy enough, but always underlined with a great joke. I find the portal to another dimension especially good.
Quit throwing your garbage into our dimension.
The real highlight of the episode, and where the scares really kick in, is the part towards the end where the family gets possessed and try to kill each other. The house target of them is eerie, and seeing the Simpsons family go after each other like this is quite effective. The music sells it too. This scene is also underlined with a good screw the audience joke. The ending of this is very interesting, leaves us off in a memorable note. I feel a later season might have wanted to go goofier with this ending, but I'm glad this one didn't.
They are all against you, Bart. You must kill them all. They all must die.
Are you my conscience? Hungry are the damned.
Hungry Are the Damned is a classic and good early example of a sci-fi segment, and a good play on a Twilight Zone episode, something the show would do multiple times in the future. This episode has a lot of things going for it, the atmosphere, the coloring, the jokes, but more than anything else, it's the introduction of Kang and Kodos. If you don't love Kang and Kodos, I don't know what's wrong in your life, but you should seek to fix it. These guys are hilarious in any appearance they make, and this mention surely isn't going to be their last in this video. In this episode, the Simpsons get abducted by Kang and Kodos, who are going to take them to their home planet, Rigel 4, for a feast. They feed the family plenty on their way, weighing them, looking to really fatten them up. Lisa naturally becomes suspicious of the aliens' intentions and investigates. This episode is not very scary. It's not scary at all. It lies more in the funny direction. It has its moments, what with the suspicions of the aliens clearly looking to eat the Simpsons. The opening scene with the Simpsons having a barbecue in their backyard that gets interrupted by the abduction is also very well done in terms of atmosphere. It might be my favorite part of the episode visually. The rest is fun alien stuff and mostly about the jokes. I love the deviousness of these aliens. They make themselves seem very sinister. The voice acting on their part is also superb. The ending of this episode is hilarious. I don't want to spoil it if you haven't seen it, but it is very ridiculous in the best way without going too far. If aliens are your thing, and why wouldn't they be, this is about as good as it gets.
Thank you very much, Mr.
To pronounce it correctly, I would have to pull out your tongue.
The Raven, for me, is the highlight of this first Treehouse episode. It's pretty simple. Lisa reads Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven to Bart, and the rest of the episode is more or less almost a straight-up adaptation of the poem, with some jokes in between. Bart is the titular Raven, and Homer is the narrator, the lead character of the poem. The highlight of this segment is the narration done by James Earl Jones. He has an amazing voice and reads the poem beautifully. There's a lot of emotion and passion in his voice. They really lucked out with having him narrate this. It could basically carry the segment by itself. But the good part is that the segment is otherwise also good. I mean, it's The Raven. It's a good poem, makes sense that it would work. This episode falls into the category of not the funniest, not the scariest, but definitely interesting and atmospheric. So much of the episode is just The Raven. They do add jokes in, but they let a lot of it just play straight, in a sense. They don't interrupt the poem for gags on that many occasions. The jokes are more in the line of Lenore's hair needing an additional painting, or just making Bart the Raven. I mean, that is already super funny in on itself.
Quoth the Raven.
Eat my shorts.
It's also visually one of the best segments. It's very storyboard driven, and clearly a lot of thought went into getting as much out of these shots as possible. The coloring, the lighting, it's all great. I don't really know what else to say. I can only praise this short segment so much without repeating myself. It's one of my favorites. It's very appropriate for the season. It's got charm, it's got atmosphere, it has it all.
Darkness there, and nothing more.
You know what would have been scarier than nothing?
What?
Anything!
This is the part where I go over the funnier segments, also using 3 examples for this one. These are great episodes, but they're not that scary. If that's what you're looking for, then these are for you. From Season 5, Treehouse of Horror 4, it's Bart Simpson's Dracula. It It's very directly a Bram Stoker's Dracula parody, with some The Lost Boys thrown in for good measure, and Charlie Brown again. This episode is full of those fun Halloween vibes. It's not overtly that scary, but has its fair share of gothic horror imagery and very fun vampire antics. They hit the nail in the head with the genre parody, not only in the visual style, but also the tropes of the genre. I love how oblivious everyone, except Lisa, is to Mr. Burns very obviously being the Dracula. They cram in as many visual gags as they can, poking fun at the stylistic choices of the Coppola film. Stylistic choices that, by the way, are awesome. Mr. Burns is a fun presence to have in a Treehouse of Horror episode, although this time Smithers doesn't really get that much play. They had a fun dynamic in the King Kong parody, King Homer, as well as If Only I Had a Brain, their Frankenstein parody. But even with the lack of Smithers, Mr. Burns shines in this episode. Him being Dracula is perfect casting. He really gets to play up how evil he is, although he doesn't necessarily need a Halloween episode for that. I have to say the ending is a bit too nonsense for its own good. The Charlie Brown parody is fun, but I don't know if all the pieces come together regarding who is the head vampire, and I would still prefer more horror-focused wrap-up to a Halloween special. I think season 6 did it right with its musical number featuring gas that turns people inside out. Disgusting. The episode is still great, and the ending doesn't ruin it or anything. Most of the material still lands extremely well, and the segment is considered a classic for a reason. It's a must-see during the spooky season for its gothic imagery, vampire shenanigans, and great jokes.
This black cape was found on the scene. Police are baffled.
We think we're dealing with a supernatural being, most likely a mummy.
First, is Homer squared among the funniest Treehouse segments? Well, it's really funny, it might be, but you could also argue that it's not. It's here because some of the funnier ones are yet to come, we have one whole extra segment towards the end, and also because it's definitely worth highlighting. Is it worth highlighting because it's scary? No, it's not scary, but it is interesting. It's got something that no other segment at the time had. An extra dimension.
Sorry.
Yes, another Twilight Zone parody. In this one, Homer travels to another dimension through a portal in his house. In there, Homer becomes three-dimensional. Now, I can say a lot about this episode, but as you can see, we're right now looking at the best part of it. Keep in mind this is season 7 and 1995 CGI. This is some ambitious and out there stuff for the time. This might still be the best 3D render of Homer I've seen. The CGI is charming and holds up remarkably well. Is it largely here for the novelty? Yeah, for sure. But when the novelty's this neat, it's really all it needs. This was The Simpsons doing something completely new and innovative at the time, and I respect the hell out of it. While it's not scary, the 3D realm does have a nice mood to it. The grid floor fading into absolute darkness, these weird shapes and equations everywhere, the soundscape, it's all great. It also ends with Homer falling into a dumpster in the real world. This part is only a few seconds, but I always wanted to see more of it. I could go for a follow-up segment in a future Treehouse of Horror episode, seeing Homer's journey in our world. I think it would be fun. The Homer is well integrated into the live-action footage here too. All in all, one of my favorite segments. If that's because of a gimmick, then so be it. The gimmick is good, the segment is still well written, and is plenty funny.
Here is an ordinary square. Whoa, slow down, egghead. Suppose we extend the square beyond the two dimensions of our universe along the hypothetical z-axis there.
Citizen Kang is very heavily into politics. American politics. American electoral politics from the 90s. There's no reason I should have any interest in it, but like all the good parodies mentioned here work as fun segments even without having seen the original thing they're parodying, this works very well even if you know next to nothing about American electoral politics from the 90s. Which I don't. To me, Bob Dole is just the guy from this episode that is naked in a tube for a bit, and I guess he's a Republican. But I won't hold it against this episode. But this is one of my absolute favorite Treehouse of Horror segments, and honestly, some of the best Simpsons period. While the commentary on the Democratic and Republican candidates being basically interchangeable monsters doesn't hold up as much in today's world, the monsters are now very distinct, everything else holds up remarkably well. And like I promised before, we hadn't seen the last of Kang and Kodos, as they return in their best appearance to date. Homer gets once again abducted by them and is ordered to take the aliens to America's leader. This is complicated by the fact that there is an election going and the leader may change. The only logical thing for Kang and Kodos to do is to abduct both candidates, disguise themselves as them, and replace them in their run for office. We get so many great jokes from just watching these weirdo aliens running for office opposite each other.
President, sir, people are becoming a bit confused by the way you and your opponent are constantly holding hands.
We are merely exchanging long protein strings. If you can think of a simpler way, I'd like to hear it.
These are some of the funniest jokes I've ever seen on any show ever, and once again, I don't know anything about the political campaigns these guys were running at the time. It's just so funny to see these aliens go through the trouble of going through an election just to overtake and enslave the Earth in the end. We do get a lot of good alien abduction humor once more, jokes about probing and whatnot, but the meat of the episode is the aliens running for office, while trying to hide the fact that they're aliens. And they're so obviously aliens, but still successfully manage to fool everyone.
As Overlord, all will kneel trembling before me and obey my brutal commands. End communication.
That's Slick Willie for you, always with the smooth talk.
It's perhaps more sci-fi than horror, but I'll take it. And really, what is more scary than American electoral politics?
We like to troll. We like to go the night before one of their primaries. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
Other good segments that I want to quickly highlight in the funny category are Clown Without Pity, a fun Jackie parody, House of Wax, which I think is a bit underrated, and the already mentioned King Homer, which was this close to getting highlighted, but Bart Simpson's Dracula edged it out.
Hey, I heard we're going to Ape Island.
Yeah, to capture a giant ape. I wish we were going to Candy Apple Island.
Candy Apple Island? What do they got there?
Apes, but they're not so big.
I'll also throw in Fly vs. Fly, because I want to recommend it, but it's probably not scary enough to go into that category. We've moved away from the episodes leaning more on the jokes and moving into the ones leaning more into horror. But make no mistake, this is still The Simpsons. All these episodes are still funny. These are the ones that balance the jokes and horror well and manage to genuinely creep me out, despite being cartoons about a silly yellow family. Let's get into it, with ascending level of scariness. From Season 7, it's Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace. This is a wonderful little parody of Nightmare on Elm Street. And really, out of all the slashers to go with, Nightmare on Elm Street is the perfect choice for The Simpsons to parody. Especially looking back at how cartoony the original series itself got.
Hey, you forgot the Power Glove!
They get real creative with these dream sequences, especially the opening sequence has a real fun look to it. The plot is pretty much the Nightmare on Elm Street plot. A strange man invades children's dreams and kills them while they're asleep, just with the Springfield kids and Willie as Freddy Krueger. And I gotta say, Willie as Freddy is a fantastic choice. He fits the role strangely well. He's really funny, but also quite intimidating. And that's really what this episode excels at. This episode is among the best for balancing the horror with the comedy. The two segments I'll be talking about after this are definitely scarier, but this one manages a nice balance. Like, Martin's death is made in a way that is quite unnerving for The Simpsons, but the morbid quality of it is then taken to an absurd level, bringing it back around to being funny.
It's best the children don't see him. Oh, just get it out of here.
Not into the kindergarten.
Or what was for me, especially as a kid, the scariest part of the episode, Willie's red burning skeleton swearing vengeance on the children of the people who let him die. The situation is already very silly, this guy burning to death while Van Houten is just going on about spaghetti meals.
I don't like the idea of Milhouse having 2 spaghetti meals in one day.
But the visual of this red burning skeleton is quite spooky, one of the best Treehouse of Horror scares in my opinion, but even this is underlined with a gag. Also, this is the episode with the do not touch Willie joke. It has to be one of the funnier ones. All in all, great fun, very creative, and has some good scares to boot.
It was only a dream.
Bart! Is that you?
Yes?
Take out the garbage.
Season 8 was among the first Simpsons DVD box sets we had as children. I saw this when I was extremely young, so your mileage may vary, but I think The Thing and I is proper scary, especially for child me, but I still think it works. The segment I'll be talking about after this one may be scarier, but when I was a kid, this freaked me the fuck out unlike anything else. The story is a mystery that starts when the Simpsons kids hear something crawling around in the attic. They ask their parents about it, but get dismissed in the most suspicious way you possibly could.
Attic? Oh, that's silly. Seriously, though, don't ever go up there.
From there on, it's just about adding layers to the mystery until the big reveal. And one thing I like about this episode is the amount of time it dedicates to build-up. We first only hear noises, get some jokey remarks about feeding something fish heads, and only later on we see our first glimpses. One of which is a visual that is the major reason this segment made me want to piss my pants as a kid. It's a rather claustrophobic episode too, all of the action taking place in the Simpsons house. I like how they make this very familiar location to anyone watching feel very unsafe. I may be alone on this. As far as I've seen online, a lot of people don't seem to regard this segment as highly as I do, but I think it's constructed very well. Obviously, it won't give you the same experience as an adult that it did to a child, but it's still very effective. The episode is lighter on the funny side, although there are a handful of laugh-out-loud moments in it. This is the episode with probably the funniest Hibbert joke in the whole show after all. But I like it more for the scares and the feeling of unease that looms over most of the episode. I even like the ending that is at the same time corny and mean-spirited. A simpler outing, but quite a creepy one.
Bart, do you think it's safe? I don't care. I can't breathe in here.
Season 6 really pushed it with Nightmare Cafeteria. This is the closest thing to straight-up horror that The Simpsons has ever gotten. Among other segments in this episode, it's no wonder Treehouse of Horror 5 is held in such high regard. This episode still gives me the creeps. It's very unsettling. It still manages to be funny, but boy did they push hard on the scary side this time. The story takes place in Springfield Elementary, where detention is getting overcrowded, a not-so-subtle social commentary on the American prison system. Skinner comes up with a creative solution to free up space in detention by grinding children into meat and serving them for lunch. Yikes. This episode manages to be so unnerving while actually showing very little. We hear Jimbo being made into food.
It's hard for me to clean this giant pot when you keep spilling meat tenderizer all over me. Oh, great. Now I gotta work in the dark.
After which, we just see people getting sent to detention, knowing what their fate is. There is a real feeling of dread that looms over the whole segment, if you can believe such a thing. I think what helps is that the episode doesn't get that wacky. It's still over the top and has its silly moments, but it's surprisingly toned down. There are no supernatural elements, no ghouls, no mutants or freaks, no cults, none of that. Just the teachers eating the students as a solution to a problem. Just seeing them eat and serve these burgers, knowing it's made of people, the whole thing is quite gross, without having overt gross-out moments. The Simpsons managed more subtle and effective horror storytelling than a lot of horror movies, which is at the same time a great accomplishment for The Simpsons and a mark against horror films. But I don't know what more I can do to sell Nightmare Cafeteria. It's the scariest Treehouse of Horror segment. That makes it worth a watch on its own.
Detention.
This is the best of the best. Creme de la creme. The alphas, or perhaps sigmas, of The Simpsons Halloween specials. And also the answer to the question, why wasn't the Devil and Homer Simpson in the funniest episode category? It's here. These three deserve their own spot. I think they're that great. As mentioned, the Season 5 Treehouse of Horror segment, The Devil and Homer Simpson, deserves to be known among the likes of Citizen Kang as one of the funniest Simpson episodes ever made. I mean, Ned Flanders is the devil in this one. If that isn't inspired casting, I don't know what is. The segment has Lionel Hutz in it, need I say more? I probably shouldn't say need I say more at the beginning of the segment. In a parody of The Devil and Daniel Webster, Homer wants a donut so bad he would sell his soul for one. The devil takes up his offer and states that the instant Homer finishes the donut, his soul is the property of the devil. Homer, in a surprisingly smart moment from him, doesn't finish the donut, outsmarting the devil.
I'm smarter than the devil! I'm smarter than the devil!
You're not smarter than me!
But later, in an equalizing stupid moment, wanders to the fridge at night and eats the forbidden last piece. As he's being condemned to hell, Marge and Lisa convince Ned the devil that Homer deserves a fair trial, which is to be held the next day. Until then, Homer will spend the day in hell. And that's where we get to the meat of the episode. Homer's time in hell, and then the trial for his soul. Homer's time in hell is short, but iconic. The ironic punishment of having to eat all the donuts in the world is a great gag. Not to mention the neat visual of him descending down to hell. This episode is overall visually very nice. The portal to hell in the kitchen is a definite highlight. There's great lighting throughout, the character designs are charming. I can't help but keep gushing over Ned Flanders as the devil. The design is a lot of fun. Homer's donut head is another iconic image. And hey, there's the Grim Reaper again. Love when that guy shows up. The trial itself is the best portion of the episode. Out of all the colorful characters, Lionel Hutz really steals the show. He's among the funniest Simpsons characters, and letting him run loose in this situation is a ton of fun.
Mr. Simpson, don't you worry. I watched Matlock in a bar last night. The sound wasn't on, but I think I got the gist of it.
There's not a single line read from this character that doesn't crack me up. This one isn't heavy on scares, but when it comes to jokes and fun characterization, this is some of the best television out there. And it still has Hell, the Devil, Grim Reaper, and Richard Nixon in it, so it's a great addition for Halloween time. Needless to say, these last three are the most essential watching in my opinion.
Very well. But first, some ground rules. Number 1, we get bathroom breaks every half hour.
Agreed. Number 2, the jury will be chosen by me.
Agreed. No, wait.
Silence!
From Treehouse of Horror 5, it's Time and Punishment. And for complete transparency right up front, this is my personal favorite Treehouse of Horror segment. It's a bit odd, considering this is more of a sci-fi romp and I'm usually more into the horror fare, but this is a concept executed to such perfection that I can't help but love it. From the first seconds, the episode is hilarious.
Sitting here now with you and the kids in our cozy home, it just makes me feel that I'm really a lucky guy.
This might be one of the most ridiculous ways to kick off an episode, but boy is it funny.
Dad, it's in there again!
The story proper kicks off when Homer fixes the toaster after having broken it, somehow managing to make it into a time machine that transports him to a prehistoric time when he sets it to toast. And really, the rest of the episode is Homer going back through time, accidentally changing something, and coming back to a present that is radically changed. What you want is Homer going through as many possible alternate realities and getting all the jokes you can out of that. I could honestly take a full episode of this. And while this episode isn't heavy on the horror, some of the alternate presents can have disturbing imagery in them.
This is indeed a disturbing universe.
Like the alternate timeline where Flanders is a dictator and rules the world. Again, wonderful use of Flanders in these episodes. He forces everyone to be smiley and positive at all times, even going as far as lobotomizing people to make them subservient. It's ridiculous but creepy. The segment also has a wonderful adventure feel to it. Every time they go back and forth, I can't wait to see what comes next. Even on repeat viewings, that feeling persists. Even if they had to completely shift the basement to a location it's never been in for the reveals, it's completely worth it. The reveals really make the episode. And the Simpsons basement, and the whole house for that matter, have always been kind of a nightmare in terms of geography. So who cares? I like a lot of the visuals, especially Homer zapping away is very striking, as well as this time travel sequence. Also, Kang and Kodos make an appearance. All in all, this segment is as good as they come. And while it may be my personal favorite, there is one segment that reigns supreme above all.
Remember the advice your father gave you on your wedding day? If you ever travel back in time, don't step on anything, because even the tiniest change can alter the future in ways you can't imagine.
Season 6 really had the ultimate Treehouse of Horror, didn't it? Nightmare Cafeteria, Time and Punishment, and the pinnacle of Simpsons Halloween segments, The Shinning. It also ends with the Skin Inside Out musical number. Not only does The Shinning make for perfect Halloween watching, it's a perfect episode of The Simpsons, and also a perfect parody of The Shining. It's such a perfect parody that parodying The Shining beyond it is unnecessary. What can you do that they didn't already do far better? It's scene after scene of jokes that all land. Every element of The Shining is lampooned to perfection.
That's odd. Usually the blood gets off at the second floor.
They go through every iconic scene, and in turn make some iconic Simpsons moments. Homer's insane rambling is hilarious and a quintessential Simpsons moment. Every plot point is turned on its head to make it hilarious, while still managing to keep the horror feel to it all. Throughout all the jokes, you still get the descent into madness and paranoia, even if the descent does happen fast. But that just fits Homer's character, as does going insane from lack of beer and TV. The casting of this also seems to do itself. The Simpsons as the Torrances is a no-brainer. Of course Homer is gonna be Jack. Moe as Lloyd the barkeep is obvious, as is Willie as Dick Halloran. These are obvious, but perfect casting decisions. Burns and Smithers are also in this, both very funny. Really makes you a believer in Mr. Burns' supremacy in the Halloween episodes. I didn't even mention his appearance in The Devil and Homer Simpson. If only he managed to squeeze himself into Time and Punishment. Really, all this segment is missing is Kang and Kodos, but I don't know where they could have cramped them. And when my criticisms are on the level of this episode didn't have needless aliens in it, you know that the episode is for all intents and purposes perfect. And hey, they did fit in Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, Pinhead, The Mummy, Dracula, and the Wolfman. I really don't want to say much more. I don't know how to better sell it other than to say it's the best quintessential Treehouse of Horror segment. If you watch only one, make it this one, although to be honest, you have probably already seen it.
Give me the bat. Come on. Give me the bat. Give me the bat. Scaredy cat. Yeah.
So there they are, my recommendations for the best Treehouse of Horror segments for the Halloween time, and the reasoning for each one. It's really hard to narrow it down when it comes to these. There are so many good ones, even in the modern seasons. The only one from those I really remember disliking is the one where Homer becomes a farting paralyzed Spider-Man or something. I mean, it sounds like a classic, doesn't it? I really love the freedom these episodes seem to give the writers. They really let loose, going absurd, violent, scary, and ridiculous with these in ways they couldn't get away with in regular episodes. But as far as they go, they still manage to have good storytelling and spot-on characterization. There aren't a lot of times that Homer doesn't feel like Homer. Even when he's a giant man-eating ape with no dialogue, he still feels like Homer. Elements of them are pushed to the extreme. Bart is made a murderer, for example, but you still feel like you're watching Bart, not just some random killer that happens to look like Bart. If this isn't enough, and you want to keep that Halloween feeling alive beyond the Treehouse of Horrors, I would also suggest the episode The Springfield Files, an in-universe alien story and a parody of the X-Files. It's a brilliant parody, very funny, but largely thanks to the classic X-Files theme, it has a lot of genuine atmosphere to it. But I think that's enough. On top of all of this, there are a billion Halloween things to enjoy. You could go watch the couple of great Halloween-themed King of the Hill episodes they made, or literally anything else. So I think you'll manage on your own now. The only thing left to say is...
What?